Rick and Morty presents Big Dumb Summer Vacation. Beth says it's nice that Rick's trying to get his family to go on a vacation and tells her family not to ruin this by bickering. Jerry's smart enough to anticipate Rick ruining the trip for them, and she smartly tells him not to forget the sunblock. Rick makes a sarcastic joke as they leave, and he plans to use his spaceship to take them to the best beach ever. And he lazily doesn't explain why it's the best beach ever. So I hope the story will to justify itself. Rick says he's the one paying for the vacation and smartly tells Morty to hand him shrimp. The president tried to call Rick for help with an emergency that must be really tough if his military can't handle it and he's too proud to call back. Rick realistically noticed he tried to call him on his cell phone but is too proud to call back. And it's funny that the president blatantly lies. "Quit looking at me, I've done all that I can do." What's confusing is that right after this, he still sends Rick a hologram requesting his help. Why is it Jerry who lectures Rick about his selfishness instead of Morty thinking to do it first, when nearly every time Morty whines at him to try to save the world, he does it? And Rick already knows about the piñata invasion, so I guess he was shown a hologram of it off screen. It's supposed to be a comedy franchise, and I can assume that aliens take piñatas way more seriously because it's an ancient tradition to them. Surprisingly, Rick still makes it to the beach, so his family gave up quick for some reason. And the aliens at the reception desk are expecting Rick. Jerry's told he can't sunbathe because the beach is closed until 4 p.m. because the sun's rays would be too strong otherwise. So how did he think this was the best beach? It's sad when even Jerry's smarter. Why would they have a beach resort here? Beth and Summer get impressed by and compliment some seashell art in front of the person who made it, who's motivated enough to make it even though it washes away by evening. Somehow Morty thinks these two aren't doing the right thing. Somehow Jerry wastes time trying to go sunbathing early and also looks at the sun, so he's thrown towards Beth in handcuffs. There's no reason the lobsters being served to the family would have normal people names and be able to talk, because that would just discourage people from eating them. And why would they want a surplus of uneaten lobsters? Why even give people the option to eat them if they don't want them eaten? Surprisingly, Beth and Jerry are excited to watch the lobsters fight to the death, and all of the family ate the lobsters anyways, because of Rick's influence. Beth defends Morty for staring at alien girls, telling Jerry to leave him alone because he's just bad at talking to girls. Then someone tells the family to use the parlor of fate. Jerry says he won't be swindled by a psychic even though Rick's paying for it. And in an alien world, for all he knows, psychics could be real there. Rick says he'll pay this guy to learn when Beth will be free of him. And it's confusing that it gets shown multiple deaths that are wacky enough to be Rick's fault. This implies that Rick's either given him Operation Phoenix or is going to. Jerry then takes some taffy and enjoys the taste, and leaves before he could be told what it's made of. This is reminding me of Jerry Boree. The only conflict is minor conflict when there's a lot of forced problems with a place meant for fun. And if there's a more exciting problem afterwards, it'll just barely be better if it's also forced. Jerry leaves candy on the beach, and you'd think the guards would hear him and instantly turn and face and stop him. Why would you have assumed he was being lied to about the sunbathing being lethal on an alien planet that's already proven itself to be really weird? While I could understand that he assumes he's got Operation Phoenix because of the multiple death cards that have his face because of alien technology, he'd know death would still hurt. Instantly someone tells him to get off the beach, and somehow he doesn't simply pick him up and carry him off it. You'd think after Beth was told to keep an eye on Jerry after he was arrested, someone in his family would have kept an eye on him to keep him from going here. How can I be entertained by an idiot plot? It's not like the consequence is going to be slapstick after all. Rick says something feels off for no apparent reason and uses a knife to take something off an alien who keeps smiling the whole time, which has to be because that part of the alien's body doesn't feel pain, probably because it grows back so fast that there was no evolutionary advantage to the pain. Either that or he's brainwashed by the environment into always being happy. And if he saw him get hurt and he was still happy, Then it would make sense that he said something feels off. Like if something fell on him by accident. Rick used a convenient microscope that I guess was on sale here to see that a magical virus called Heliofrank is on the skin sample. He gets mad at Jerry, and I wonder how the virus got on this guy all the way over there away from Jerry and his new friend. Rick and his family ride on the beach on little cars, and then Rick tells his family to not let the lobsters infect them, and he punches one of them away with his bare hands anyways, instead of growing robot arms out of his back again to punch them. Also, it never makes sense when the impact isn't shown when a character gets hit in Rick and Morty. Beth smartly insists on leaving instead of burying the evil lobsters, and the monster says that he's gonna have a good time because all of Rick's family went to the beach at the wrong time. Rick says this guy's popped out of the sun. It can't really be the sun, it'd be too hot, not to mention far away. Somehow Jerry doesn't listen to Rick telling him to leave, despite all of his experience with alien worlds. Why doesn't Rick just use one of his many cyborg powers to kill Heliofrank? Instead we see Rick in another place relaxing, and a button gets pressed, and we see a hologram of Rick behind Rick. I'm so confused. Jerry follows Heliofrank towards a fake sun that must be a hologram, and he can walk around in it and enjoy eating something offered to him. So there must be invisible platforms there. He's told he's feeling the absence of negativity and wonders how everyone can feel so good. The obvious twist villain tells him to become like him and make the world glow. Beth tells her family to walk ahead and not let themselves get infected. And Summer appreciates being told that she's got a cool style, and I can't really blame her for only wanting to hear good things. Rick says he's letting Heliofrank have his little moment and that it'd take 2 seconds to turn him into a candle. There's no excuse for acting in such a risky way when his family's there though, and he could be suckered into staying here forever too, and then he'd have no way of getting them home. Though it would make sense of Rick to not care about that. They find out what happened to Jerry, and I wonder if Heliofrank is genuinely a well-intentioned extremist. Rick's smart and cynical enough to jump to the conclusion that Heliofrank knows himself enough to know he can't feel good all the time because he's smart like him. How does he know he's smart like him? It's a big assumption to make for a genius. It turns out Rick already has a bottled cure for the parasites, so I guess he made out of the materials in this place and was keeping the bottle in an unseen pocket in his vest the whole time. Morty gets brainwashed, and Rick snaps him out of it in a mean way for stress relief. I guess he kept his liquid cure on his hand to splash him with it. I like that Morty sarcastically thanks him and says he remembers his place now. Jerry tries to convince someone he can get made happy and fails somehow, and maybe his failure is the reason he wishes they were doing something other than this. Besides, just because he wants to be made happy doesn't mean he'd want that for everybody. I wish the pacing was faster. Why is another person able to reject the brainwashing? Wouldn't it be too powerful? And we see Rick hitting Heliofrank in one panel in the sky, so I have to assume he's controlling a flying 3D hologram avatar of himself from somewhere else. We see him back on the ground, and it's dark, with Jerry sorta back to normal. Rick expects me to believe not every planet needs a sun for life. Why isn't he just explaining that it was obviously never the actual sun because it was too close to the planet? Someone cathartically tells Heliofrank to get out of here, and Rick isn't worried that he's gonna try to take over the world again because he lives off of positive energy, and without that, he's got 6 hours to live. I have to assume that with all of his experience with aliens, he knows that because he's seen other members of his species before. But still, this guy would have to be magical to be a threat. And how could an entire species be like that? He wouldn't be here. This guy would only make sense if he was called a warlock. I guess he is, and it's just that he's only using one power to avoid giving away the existence of witches. Maybe only Heliofrank can do this, as far as Rick knows. And he only knows about him because he already met a different universe version of him. Why is Heliofrank saying that Jerry ruined his plan and not Rick? Why does he think he'll be able to come back stronger when everyone here hates him? An angry bird has superhuman strength when dealing with him, and I assume it's because it's an alien, and Rick decides to humor it best by going to a horse planet. Beth wants Jerry returned to normal first, and eventually is told he has to stay in a tube for hours. He's floating in it but can talk without gurgling, so it's like it's an anti-gravity place with green glass, not a place with liquid in it. Beth's smart enough to instantly question why it takes hours for Jerry to heal when it takes Rick 2 seconds to do anything. The writing was smart enough to have it explained that Rick was just making an excuse to get Jerry away from him for a while. Beth calls Jerry honey and tells him to go inside, and Jerry's smart enough to say they tricked him. Beth reassures him that Rick was just making sure he'd healed properly. But if he was, he'd already be healed. He could transfer his mind to a clone in seconds. Jerry thanks Rick, and Rick says stopping him from blowing up planets is his love language. I never thought there was any risk of that. What would Helio Frank have to gain from that? If he could do that, he would have done it instantly with his magic. There's boring panels where Rick and his family are having dinner, and Jerry looks fine, but then we see him sunburned again trying to reassure himself. So it's like he was just daydreaming that. And somehow he thinks the cockroach was Helio Frank, and the story ends with giant alien cockroaches threatening the world. So I assume the cockroach is there because Jerry got infected and somehow Rick didn't remove that from him. And so the giant cockroaches are also from Jerry? And I just have to assume the military took care of the Pinata invasion from earlier. There's a lot the writer was too lazy to explain the story. And it's discouraging that Rick and Summer are too happy to feel like trying to save Morty. This confusing story by Annie Griggs feels like it's trying to be an acid trip instead of good. Not only do I hate that it's an idiot plot because of Jerry being impossibly reckless, but the story is intentionally weird, but it just comes off like it's a waste of time when that's all that's happening. I feel like it could have been worse, but it's still a disappointment. As not only is it apathetic to making sense, but everything unique about it being on an alien beach is entirely forced, wasting the idea. I sort of like the idea of the villain's plan being to brainwash everyone into having nothing but happy thoughts if it's supposed to be an attack on toxic positivity and shitty fandoms like Sonic that are either in denial of how bad their series is now, or just can't handle hearing any criticism of it because they're wimps. But rather than the villain being told that, he seems to just be portrayed as well-intentioned. So that won't tell anybody off, because anybody like him is just gonna agree with the fact that he's trying to get everybody to stop complaining. Rick and Morty 100. After a confusing page where a hyper-realistic person somehow went crazy from reading too much Rick and Morty, a fly goes into his ear and crashes into his brain, and it's just a spaceship of a miniaturized Rick and Morty. Futurama came up with a logical way for the main characters to shrink. They didn't. They just put their minds in the bodies of tiny robots, so that's what they did. Morty's just now being told that he was sent to the brain of someone in a world obsessed with their adventures. Well, this story better try as hard as possible to be entertaining, because it's obviously not even trying to make sense with these floating machines and stuff around them here. And I just have to assume it's all an overflow of witchcraft in the air making this possible. After all, why else would Morty be able to see toys on top of a brain? There's also no way for someone to screw up drawing Morty that badly. I've already seen Pinky and the Brain go into somebody's body with a machine while they're shrunken. And Morty already went to the body of a hobo while shrunken in the show, so there's nothing new here. Rick says his weakness is no one is smart enough to tell him when he's screwing up, even though Morty tells him he is every time. I guess his point is that he can't give constructive criticism. Rick shoots a laser and says he made a world where each of their adventures were printed as a comic so that it could farm the brains of the readers to evaluate himself. You think he could rely on his own memories of his adventures to evaluate himself? Does he just barely remember his adventures? If there's infinite universes, why do you think he needed to make a universe for that? A late issue of the original comic had him casually go to a universe where there were already Rick and Morty comics. And the only reason this comic says 100 and even references Evil Jerry is that it thinks of the original comic as canon. So it'd be more effort for him to make a universe than to go back to that other one. Then eventually they get talked to by somebody because somehow there's people here. I wish it was another story about him being in a simulation that Rick made based on someone's brain instead, so I could take it seriously instead of being impatient with it. They're going to start their first trial for no apparent reason. And they're in an audience having to watch 20 minutes of commercials somehow. But it skipped past all of them, so what was the point of the plot hole? They have to watch a movie about a big shame of theirs, so at least Rick gets to eat popcorn. Rick gets shown saying that he created life from nothing. He couldn't have literally made it from nothing. I'm sure even witches would just shapeshift the air to make stuff because atoms are everywhere, so you'd have to at least replace the ones there with new ones otherwise, and that just requires more energy and effort. Morty calls him out on what he did, and he says billions make babies every day, and the one he made was an accidental petri dish one. He also explains away that it was a clone, as he gets booed at for the unnecessary and lazy thing that was written. He wouldn't actually think it being a clone makes getting rid of it okay anymore, because he still got attached to Space Beth. Then Morty is shown falling down the stairs, but he doesn't fall down nearly enough stairs for good slapstick. It's too bad he wasn't shown as doing anything that'd make him deserve this, but I can sort of appreciate this because he had the more annoying voice in the show. How convenient that the panel gets censored by these inexplicable yellow stars. Morty is shown cursing out his family, although by those standards, the fact that he only says Summer is sweet, showing how much he admires her compared to his irresponsible, selfish mother who lets Rick take him on adventures, and his annoying, stupid father. The only reason he's upset about this is out of guilt. Sadly, what happens after this is just worthless references after Rick pulls him out of the pink slime. So what? Was he never with the real Rick in the audience? If this went on longer, it could have had a chance to redeem itself and be good, like issue 50. It's also hard to buy that the person dealing with him would talk like this. Why would Rick say every reality has a Morty when there's no way that could be true if there's infinite realities? Even with the best efforts of Rick's, there'd still be too many universes for that. There's obviously no guarantee the future of this universe's comic version of his life would be the same as his own future. The shock treatment makes him look weird, but it's only an excuse to waste our time with panels from an issue I already reviewed. If they're still desperate for more sales, it couldn't have done well. Rick makes a big deal out of something, and I do like that Morty said, "Is it just gonna be us again?" And Rick of all people said, "Better not be." Maybe if the story cared about its premise making sense, I care about what's happening. Instead, I'm always distracted, wondering why they have room to move around inside of a skull and can breathe in there. There's just no incentive to read any of this guy's dialogue. I don't see the appeal of merely referencing past stuff. How about do something with it? It's written like an exaggerated parody of Flynn's reference-making habit. After another couple of pages from an issue that sold so poorly that they had to put it here, stuff I don't care about because there's no logic happens again. Why should I care about them progressing in a place when the entire place makes no sense? And it's not even like it's an alien planet. There's another bit of desperate advertising, and some more stuff I couldn't care less about happens, and I see Rick controlling the fan with stuff he wouldn't have, while Morty's in front of a hill looking for the MacGuffin. He sinks into the inexplicable merchandise, and there's even more pages from a story that didn't sell well. If someone didn't want to see it the first time, why would they want to see it this time? It doesn't make any sense that the comic Morty found escapes the body and ends up on his face, and he turns into a giant flying robot while Rick and Morty look stupid. Then they're back to normal, and next to the damaged fly spaceship, even though it should still be in the fan's brain. This is a story where it should have been explained it was all just a dream right away. It's sad when bad sitcom endings are better writing. Rick says they found their ice cream truck universe selves inexplicably, so they got what they wanted, even though Morty says they never got the comic. Well, I do find charm in Rick's memorable dialogue here. Nothing matters, and when you realize that, you're free. This garbage story has me distracted the whole time, wondering why Rick and Morty can move around freely and breathe inside of a skull. so it was impossible to enjoy what little story it had, when it wasn't just showing off pages from other issues that seemed to be picked at random. The only explanation I can come up with is that they're the ones that sold the worst, as otherwise they wouldn't be this desperate to get more sales. It thinks it's celebratory, but it's really just pathetic. But at least most of the pages being wasted means the story's faster to read and review. The characters are looking for a comic that shouldn't exist so Rick could learn how he screwed up, even though we know he has Morty for that, not to mention his own memories of his adventures. The story could have worked if the writer cared enough about logic to have the setting be a simulation that Rick made that's only metaphorically representing the brain, like what he did to explore the dying brain of a head of a Morty and Rick, and if they cut out all of the past issue pages. It would have been great if the whole issue was about showing the times they were humiliated in new ways, because that was done in issue 50 and was a good story. But the memories that were shown of them weren't enjoyable. They were either just shock value, edgy teenager style, or not cartoon slapsticky enough. And then there's the depressing subplot with the fan and the demonized person tending to him. I don't think it's a good story if I don't like most of it even enough to bother describing it. Nobody should ever make stories specifically based on the fact that they're anniversary stories for a franchise, because practically any time they try to account for that, it's a horrible story. At least when it barely tries to be a new story. References alone don't make a story good. If that's literally all you remember that makes you think a story is good, there's nothing great about the story. This kind of writing with lazy pandering and a bare-bones boring plot would impress IDW Sonic fans. But they're used to bad game stories and expect them because it's a kids' series. So anything that's not Sonic 06 or Shadow is gonna look great to them. This is a series for adults, so its fans have higher standards than this. I've seen comments about corporate assets saying they'd never buy it.